Most people, by virtue of the way that the brain's designed, it's really sort of a prediction machine and then a protection machine based on its own predictions, which when you really break it down is sort of rather nonsensical. And that's what we could call the self-fulfilling prophecy of the mind, is that the brain is predicting an outcome, which invariably is not good. And then the same brain is trying to calculate and figure out how to avoid what it just predicted. You just start to wonder, like, was not, the way I was going to say it is actually you then don't wonder why people have a drinking problem or they need some sort of medication. It's like madness. Like the one brain is creating concern for a future that hasn't happened yet, and then the same brain that created the worst case scenario is trying to come up with a solution. It's like, no wonder you're freaking exhausted. So
it's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, most people are focused on what they don't want. And that's a protection mechanism. We all have our trials and tribulations, and you burn your hand on the stove. Well, then, of course, you're going to avoid the stove because you got hurt. Unfortunately, people get hurt almost every day. And so there's an accumulation of pain and hurt that we've, delineated more as suffering. And the suffering is the thing that gets perpetuated because people want to avoid that. So they're in a relationship, they fall in love with somebody, doesn't work out, they cheat on them, they leave them, whatever happens, which is occurring every day for millions of people. And then, of course, the next time they go into a new relationship, there's complete intrepidation, So now they're like worried, and rightly so from the human perspective, that they're going to be hurt again, not realizing that this is a human being who they haven't been with. They themselves are a different person. It's a different time in the universe. And so everything is actually brand new, other than the fact that they've got a memory that is still, unprocessed, for which reason they're doing everything they can to try and avoid it being relived, not knowing that they're constantly reliving it by virtue of the fact that they're still holding on to it. That's the madness, right? So that's the thing that I'm undoing, which again is why perhaps I'm most sought after as I am, because people want to be free of the madness of their mind that's creating all of this suffering, angst, and then all of the escapism that then cascades into their life with alcohol and God knows what else that they're trying to do to numb the pain, So that's, yes, that's the difference between focusing on what you want versus what you don't want, to use your example of the rugby. And that's something with my athletes for sure that is one of the main things that we'll look at. I had an NBA guy who had one of the worst league average for free throw shooting, which is, you get fouled, you go to the free throw, you basically get a free throw at it. And it's a pretty relatively easy point for a professional. And the average was about 76% for the league, and his was about 35%. So, not too good. And suffice to say, whenever he was standing there at the line, he would get very anxious about missing, because that was his history defining his concern for a future that hadn't happened yet, informing his present state of anxiety, create tension, that changes his physiology. And then he's not throwing like he would in a warm-up or in a practice where there's no perceived outcome of any significance. So changing all that around for him gave him a totally different view of the future, which was that, the way I did it, I said, well, what if I told you that for the rest of the season you shot the league average of 76%? How would you feel? And his whole face lit up and he was like a child again. He's like, wow, that'd be amazing. And I said, well, what I just told you is as real as the one you're worried about. It's just they're both made up. We're still sitting in your kitchen. Pass me the peanuts. So it's like, you'd start to realize how powerful the mind is in the way that it actually is self-fulfilling. It's just that most people don't understand that the subconscious patterns that are driving their life are self-fulfilling from a position that they don't have any power. So that's where the whole blame thing, and shame is, it becomes nonsensical, because people, the expression I use, people can't be held accountable for that which they're oblivious to. People say, oh, well, you could have done this, or I should have done this, when people berate themselves. I'm like, yes, but if you don't know the deep-seated programming that's driving your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, then to berate yourself for an outcome that you're familiar with, even though you don't want it, is completely a disservice to who you are as a sentient being, doing the best you can. And that's the blind spots that I reveal for people. Then, yes, okay, fine. If I point out to somebody their programming that they were previously oblivious to, and then they keep doing the same thing, okay, well, now we can start to maybe, say, well, you're just being an idiot. You're being irresponsible. And again, I'm with jest, because of course these things take practice. Just you take a Formula One driver who may struggle around a particular corner because he doesn't know something about that particular, the physics of that, the tires, the ability to grip, the angle that he came in. That's coaching, right? You get better at your craft. But when it comes to the deep-seated patterns of what it means to be human and how we think people think about us, or our own self-worth, or our lovability, these are primal patterns of fear that warrant, I think, a lot more kindness and compassion for each other, until such time that we transcend them. And then, yes, we can be free and then focus on what we want, whether we're kicking, punting rugby balls or whatever it is that we're doing. It becomes a process of creation versus reaction.
Yeah. So the patterns that we all have that tend to repeat themselves, and everyone, I think, can relate to this. They have something that will just keep happening in different forms in their life. For me, it happened in my relationships, until I think one day I wrote down the names of various people I'd been in relationship with and thought, there's definitely one factor that is common to all of these, and that's me. And that was a real revelation for me. But but so underneath the pattern, though, it is a belief, let's say, like of I am unlovable or whatever. So how would you facilitate someone getting to grips with their pattern and uncovering what is underneath it that's driving it?
Personally, the way I start with is, again, it may sound a little bit woo-woo, and maybe people will think, oh, he spent too much time in America, but I start with love, which is accepting someone for where they're at with whatever their pattern is. Because, as I said earlier, people aren't consciously ruining their lives. There's something behind the scenes that's driving these patterns. So first of all, I start with love and acceptance, which I think is why people find it very easy to talk to me, because there's no judgment from my energy. So that's what I call the quintessential mother energy, the feminine, which is sort of unconditional. And that's what, mums do a good job of with children, hopefully. Not all of them, sadly. But
I did. Yeah.
Yes. So meet someone there. It's okay. First of all, you're human. You're not the only person to do whatever silly behavior and pattern it is that you have. And then we want to reverse engineer, is the term I use, understand, okay, what kind of person, we almost put it in the third person, what kind of person would do that? Like, why would it be that you would sabotage, in your case, a relationship? Or why would you be needy? Or why would you become withdrawn if you're scared of someone leaving you? What must you think about yourself, which then, as you said, goes to more the core beliefs about someone's persona. And that can sometimes take a bit to navigate, because it's a bit of a blind spot. For me, it's usually pretty self-evident, because I've done this so long that I can pretty instantaneously understand what's holding people back. But by virtue of not wanting to shock their brain, I will help them, guide them to be able to reveal it for themselves. So then they're like, well, I can see that, maybe I just feel like I'm not good enough. Okay, I can relate to that. And again, I can feel the words. And if it's something that they're saying generically because they've, maybe been to one too many therapist sessions and heard that over and over, or is it something that actually holds true for them? But let's just say it's I'm not good enough. Then I would want to bring some evidence for that. Aside from current affairs and whatever they're going through, or for you, your latest relationship or your last relationship or whatever it is, like, okay, let's go a bit deeper. Let's go a little further back. Where can you remember some of those things happening in your life that gave you the same experience of not being good enough? And again, that can take a minute for people to recall and go, well, and it's amazing how often things will bubble to the surface when people are in an arena where they feel safe. They can go, gosh, I haven't thought about this for years, but I can remember when I was 8 and I was at primary school, and they'll come up with this random name, this girl, Jenny, she was making fun of me in the hallway. It gets very specific,
Yeah.
And, I had done this drawing and she told me that my drawing looked like poo, or, something in child language, but that was pivotal for that child to go, wow, from that moment forth, especially as it relates to the feminine, I felt inadequate because, she represented the female. And so now any female authority figure, maybe this person is hired in a company where the CEO is a woman, and they're wondering why they can't seem to ascend the ranks, and they're not being picked to get an upgrade or a promotion, or, they get very nervous in the boardroom meetings, but they don't understand why. And as far as they're concerned, even the female CEO really admires their work and likes them, but they're still stuck in the trap of who I am relative to the feminine is inadequate. So that reveals it. We bring evidence to it, and then through process of investigation, I take them, I guess it's a bit of an IP to my process, is, I'll ask them to investigate the truth of that belief. And ask them to say, is it an actual truth, yes or no? And even though for them it feels very true, they can, use their discernment and intelligence and go, you know what, you're right, it's not a truth. It's been there for 30 years, so it feels very true. And at that moment, never gets old. There's a flood of tears, their breathing patterns change, and there's this feeling of complete relief of like, wow, that's dictated my life and defined me for decades.